Gaming has a problem, said no one ever. And it's a problem that could be solved if game directors took more care in portraying the experience they want to craft and how their game systems can further deliver that experience and theme. Or, if corporate would keep their fingers out of the creation of games. You see, there's a trend in the current gaming market that just makes games feel so tedious and boring to play nowadays, and that trend is a little buzzword called RPG elements. Now, there are a lot, and I do mean a lot of games that for seemingly no reason incorporate RPG elements into games, which really just means that everything has a health bar that scales at the player's level, and the weapons do arbitrary amounts of damage unless it's a certain rarity, or if it meshes with a meta character build. Now, I'm not sure why exactly someone thought that Assassin's Creed Origins needed RPG elements, but guess what? It has RPG elements now. And the RPG elements in Dying Light 2 are so much worse than its predecessor. And oh yeah, Far Cry 6 now forces you to use 3 times the amount of ammo to properly deal damage to enemies, and all the damn perks are tied to clothes. Look, there's a lot of flaws with Far Cry 6, but that's not necessarily the point of this video. Now, there's a few explanations for this phenomenon, and I would say it varies on the game and studio, and furthermore, a lot of variables inside of those studios. But one simple explanation in the more corporatized games is definitely grind. It's no secret that games are filled with filler garbage content to try and get players to spend more time in the game, and RPG elements are usually used to create artificial forms of progression. It's a tactic that MMOs tend to use to get players to spend less time playing other games. There's also the fact that a lot of people like to see a number go higher and higher, which is also abused to create constant dopamine hits, and therefore an addiction to these games. Lucky for me, I'm at least borderline dyscalculic, so these numbers scare and confuse me more than anything and turn me off from most of these games. Looter shooters like Borderlands, The Division, and Destiny purposefully utilize RPG mechanics to create an endless gameplay loop to, once again, create an artificial system of progression. What the hell? Also, we should probably come up with a new word for this mechanic than describing it as RPG mechanics, because RPG stands for role-playing game, and if you took out the grind, health bars, damage numbers, item rarity, etc., certain games can still stand on its own as an actual RPG. So, from now on, I'm going to call this something else. These are not games with RPG elements, these are numbers games. Games exclusively about numbers getting higher and higher. It's pretty clear that these elements have been twisted into what it is today, and these design elements can be traced all the way back to tabletop role-playing games, the purest form of RPG. And I'm not exclusively talking about something like D&D. I'm talking about things like GURPS, Call of Cthulhu, the World of Darkness franchise, Shadowrun. No, the TTRPG. The TTRPG, thank you. These are, in the rawest form of the word, role-playing games. You know what these have in common with this? Fucking nothing. They have numbers and random chance as a mechanic, which is only half of the experience of a TTRPG. The other half of this experience is a dynamic story that you are crafting with friends. It is a collaborative storytelling experience between the DM and the party. And when I play The Division, the role that I am playing has been given to me by a pre-written story. Which isn't inherently a bad thing, since there are a lot of fantastic games that are completely linear stories. But when you categorize a game as being RPG, and the biggest decision on playstyle is how you deal damage and what type of weapon to use, that's hardly an RPG. There isn't any variation in the roles you can play. Hell, by this logic, TF2 is as much of an RPG as The Division is. Do you want to play offense, defense, or support? Speaking of support, you can support me by joining the channel with the join button, or by joining the Discord with the link in the description. And also supporting me has been my mother, since I wanted to be a game designer as a kid. Which is why I'm talking about this. Sick fucking segue, dude. Thanks, dick. So, let's talk games. Now, disclaimer, this is my opinion, but also my opinion is correct, and if you disagree, please leave a comment detailing why. Now, there are a number of games that I have played, and I've played more than enough to know why it fails to capture me, and why I feel that I have enough authority on this topic to make this video. But the few I wanted to focus on is the Division games, Destiny, and the Dying Light games. I'll get to the point. Firearms in games just don't really work with, quote, RPG elements, unquote, i.e., numbers games. Stat-based damage is much more acceptable for melee and bow combat, since the damage you deal realistically scales directly off of how strong you are. But firearms are a piece of technology that have been developed to be some of the most devastating and destructive weapons in history. And you are telling me that this man can be shot 500 fucking times and his bones and organs aren't mush yet? Firearms are the great equalizer. Regardless of your strength, you can point, shoot, and win with no real skill. Obviously, skill wins over a lack of it, even in a gunfight, but you get my point. And this is why I love the design philosophy of immersive sims. It's the immersion. It's that when I shoot a motherfucker, they fall. Personally, I believe that instead of a looter-shooter RPG game, the Division games would have worked so much better as a tactical shooter, much like another Ubisoft game, Ghost Recon Breakpoint. Also, yeah, I think Breakpoint is better than Wildlands. Sue me, I don't care. The Division's world design is fucking amazing, too. Like, look at these gorgeous vistas of New York. And look at these amazing environments of Washington, D.C.
Echo, nearby.
And you are telling me that these environments facilitate an RPG, damage sponge, looter-shooter gameplay than a fucking tactical shooter. You can't. You can't sit in front of me and say, you know, I think that the environments and themes of the Division franchise facilitate a looter-shooter with RPG elements better. I will punch you in the goddamn face. And then I will serve you a hot plate of Escape from Tarkov, which is the superior looter-shooter, by the way. Destiny is developed by the same studio as Halo Combat Evolved through Halo Reach, of which Reach has some of the best PvP experience out of any of their Halo games. So, why the fuck is Destiny a looter shooter with RPG elements? Like, Destiny 2 has fantastic gunplay, and the animations and sounds are fucking great, and the environments are gorgeous, and they facilitate some great combat scenarios. But I think that the game would be so much better and more interesting if it was a game balanced around teamwork and skill-based gameplay, with tactics, strategy, and shit, and I promise I'm not gonna try and turn Destiny into a tactical shooter, bear with me here. Now, I think that if Destiny was balanced around cooperative play and the combat felt much more Halo-y, the game would feel so much more cohesive. Imagine going into a mission with a fire team of 4 people and playing what is essentially Halo Reach Firefight, but it's a big cooperative story-driven brawl through hordes of these incredibly unique and interesting enemies. All with their own combat styles and shit. It would be fucking cool, because if players were much squishier, it would incentivize them to cooperate much more, since the players in a fire team would need to act like guardians, relying on each other to pierce the overwhelming odds of battle, and persevering every time. And while yeah, that's still something that can be done within the game, and I'm sure it happens, especially in raids, but I feel like the gameplay does not portray this well enough. Regardless of your fire team or skill, you can succeed just because you have the numbers on your side. And that's fucking stupid, because this is the studio that made Halo 3. This is the studio that made Reach. 2 of the best Halo games ever created, with interesting and challenging combat based entirely on your skill versus an intelligent AI, that felt like it was a real combatant. And the best gameplay they could come up with was this? Look, I'm excited for the Marathon reboot, especially because extraction shooters are kind of my shit. But if it turns out like the Cycle Frontier, I'm gonna be livid. I fucking hate the numbers game Battle Royale armor and damage system. I fucking hate it so much. Dying Light is a video game that I have spent roughly 400 hours playing. Dying Light is a video game that has RPG elements, and yet these elements are hidden and integrated so well that they basically never end up bothering me. Dying Light 2, however, is a game that is a boring, tedious slog to try and play most days. Why is this? Dying Light uses a system of 4 skill trees to dictate progression. The Survivor tree, which is the player's primary progression tree and is tied to the level of difficulty from zombies and the rarity and damage of weapons. The Combat tree, which allows you to gain new combat abilities. The Agility tree, which lets you climb faster and gain new traversal abilities. And finally, the Legend tree, which is just a post-game progression system. But let's not forget that you gain XP for these trees by doing things that actually correlate to those trees. Are you constantly getting into fights and breaking lead pipes over zombie skulls? Great, here's some XP. Are you climbing around having fun just doing parkour? Awesome, here's XP. Don't spend it all in one place. Are you doing quests or gathering drops for the people at the tower? Good job! Here's a survivor level. Please don't exploit the system, I beg of you. Like, Dying Light is fucking peak zombie game for a number of reasons. But one of the biggest ones is how it kind of properly uses numbers game systems to deliver an almost survival horror experience, and I think that a lot of the issues with the looter shooters are solved here. Since the melee weapons break and they can be deconstructed to repair your weapons, the game forces you to constantly cycle weapons even when you aren't paying attention. The progression feels natural and it flows perfectly with the theme of the game. And the gameplay works perfectly with the rest of the game. Especially since zombies are already damage sponges, considering they are dead. Plus, when you finally get overpowered weapons that one-shot zombies, it feels more like the player is getting better at killing the zombies, as they are in a constant state of getting better at survival inside of the quarantine zone, instead of just getting a weapon with better damage numbers. The RPG stylings placed into the game feel natural, and it's almost unnoticeable, which is a good thing, especially since the survival elements of weapon durability and crafting using components and repairing weapons with components gained from other weapons allows for the cycling of weapons to feel more natural, as older weapons deteriorate and are replaced by better ones. And that feels completely natural, since decent weapons would be tough to come by in a zombie outbreak, and you would want to maintain the ones you have. The RPG elements are entwined with the rest of the game to allow for a natural progression that leads to you becoming the most powerful living being in the quarantine zone. And it doesn't feel jarring or boring, it's perfectly handled. And Dying Light 2 really sucks ass because not only is this out in the open, but it's just not a survival horror experience anymore. They focused on the people, and don't get me wrong, the human combat is so much better, but holy shit do I not feel any kind of panic at night. There's barely any zombies during the day, and the story is somehow worse than the first game. Because instead of a generic story about a group of survivors desperately trying to survive just one more hour in a quarantine zone infested with monsters who want to eat you alive, now it's a drama story about someone trying to find their long-lost sister among a civil war between two poorly written human factions. And the gameplay doesn't reflect it at all. Weapons can't be repaired, and they're basically garbage if they can't be used now. And there just generally isn't a feeling of progression since the zombies' damage sponginess has been amplified, since the weapon spawns feel so much less smoothly implemented. Feels like a chore to find half-decent weapons. Dying Light 2 is slowly getting better, but holy shit, please, use the modern technology that we have to rewrite and update the plot. Please. God damn, this shit is so boring and kind of a slog to get through on a second playthrough. None of this makes sense. And I've just been notified that I'm not allowed to rant about Dying Light 2 any longer, since I won't have any content left for a bigger video on the franchise later. So, after looking at these 3 games and what they do right, or wrong, can you utilize firearms properly in a first-person/third-person based shooter and still have RPG elements? I think so, because by far the least interesting thing in an RPG is combat. More interesting moments come from creative solutions to problems, or cool moments like flipping over a fence and sneaking through a manor to assassinate the Duke of a town because the character I've built is just that damn good at sneaking around places. Now, it's not to say that combat can't facilitate cool moments, but usually combat can be the most time-intensive and boring part of a traditional RPG. So, what would my ideal FPS RPG look like? Well, I would personally design this theoretical game like this. And I would also like to note that this is entirely based on the classical idea of an RPG, combining the elements of a first-person shooter with those classical design elements of an RPG, not whatever numbers game bullshit is going on with current modern gaming. Now, designing a character comes down to some very basic and yet in-depth principles. Your character has stats that can be increased or decreased, and that allows for you to open up new avenues of progression through the game. For example, a character who is a thief can open up locked doors, they can slink through vent shafts, they're much stealthier in encounters, and yet if they were to get into open combat, they wouldn't be any less effective at shooting guys than someone who's designed to be a hulking brute who can pry open locked doors and take a bit more damage, because both of these characters are as skilled at combat as the player playing them. Granted, the combat would feel much different, as a thief would slink between cover and strike fast and lethally, and would be unable to use heavy weapons like rocket launchers or LMGs, but fundamentally the experience would be the same between characters. The gameplay and playstyles would just be slightly different. And I know that this is kind of sounding like an immersive sim, but it isn't, because an immersive sim doesn't have a focus on combat. The entire point of a first-person shooter or a third-person shooter is the shooting. It's combat, it's almost unavoidable, and I feel like The Division and Destiny fail to realize the potential of the idea of a first-person shooter or third-person shooter RPG. In my opinion, relying on random chance, or really numbers on anything in a first-person shooter game, is dumb, and if you want to make a first-person shooter role-playing game, you need to guarantee that the role-playing elements don't affect the damage, accuracy, or general FPS foundation, because nobody likes to roll the dice every time they pull a trigger in an FPS. The ability to decide our own fate in combat via skill is what makes so many games fantastic, and the concept for an FPS with RPG elements could be wonderful, since it allows for so many unique playstyles while still having fun-ass shooter gameplay. Like, I would love a game to have Fallout, Prey, and/or Deus Ex levels of roleplay potential. But the gunplay and combat of Ghost Recon, Insurgency Sandstorm, Ready or Not, Fear, or Metro Exodus? Like, fuck, that sounds like a damn good game and I fucking want it. I also feel the need to clarify that I don't think that all games that use the medium of first person or third person should separate the shooting from the numbers, since there are a lot of classic immersive sims and RPGs that force you to spec into the concept of guns to actually use them effectively, and that is understandable because the difficulty and depth there comes from the character's ability and skill, not the player's. However, this design philosophy should be thrown out when gunfights are the primary focus of the content. Personally, I think that while the proposed idea of an FPS RPG I've brought up is more FPS than RPG, and you may think it's disingenuous to the idea of an RPG, I raise you this. Is this faithful to the idea of an RPG? Is this? Because as far as I'm concerned, this theoretical game design idea of an FPS that has standard solid shooter mechanics, paired with role-playing elements from something like New Vegas or Prey, is a much better game with RPG elements than anything drawn up in recent memory. Thank you for coming to my TED Talk. Thanks for watching this ramble. Please, support me by joining the channel or the Discord. Alternatively, you can just go and watch more of my stuff. Thanks, and bye.